Welcome to Forecast Lab. Because of Hurricane Milton, we've got a different schedule this week. The public programs will be on Monday and Wednesday. The private show for Patreon supporters will be on Friday. As we have a potential disaster unfolding, we're just kind of opening it up for Monday. And you will get a bit of a different perspective here. I don't follow the news cycle and all the hype on TV. I'm just too busy with work, projects, and family. What I do is I look at the actual data and draw on my own experience. So you'll probably get maybe a different picture of what's going on this program. Check out how things looked on Friday. You may remember NHC only had a 40% chance of development, which goes to show how quickly this thing came together. Just phenomenally rapid development, day by day, hour by hour. In the past 18 hours, we went from a storm with no eye to a Category 5 hurricane. So now we regroup and look at things with the latest data. The NHC updates from 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. were significant. Not only did we get that upward creep in strength, but we saw rapid short-term development. Let's take a look at the Dvorak imagery. And there it is, a well-defined eye with a very symmetric ring of cloud cover. And it's showing rather cold temperatures, starting to bring out that medium gray color. Let's take a look at some examples of what Category 5 should look like. Well, there you go. There's one rather extreme example, Hurricane Gilbert in 1988. The cloud tops even colder, getting into the dark gray region and keeping that very symmetric appearance. Here's Hurricane Beryl from early July out there in the Caribbean. It doesn't look quite as symmetric, however, that's because the cloud tops are a little bit warmer, so not really getting into those white and medium gray shades, but that's another example. The storm had just reached Category 5. Some of the data that helps determine strength comes from the Hurricane Hunter flights and other data sources. So this is just one tool, and this does not give us a category number. It gives us a T number, which goes into the intensity estimate. As of Monday evening, Milton was 155 knots for sustained winds, or 180 miles an hour, making it well into the Category 5 range. Central pressure at 906 millibars. Only 7 Atlantic hurricanes have been lower than this, and the 180-mile-an-hour wind has only been exceeded by 5 hurricanes, one of which was 190. That was Hurricane Allen in 1980. Some excellent graphics from Levi Cowan at Tropical Tidbits. Good site there showing the Hurricane Hunter passes across Hurricane Milton. They did measure a drop down to 911 millibars, which is 77 millibars lower than yesterday at the same time. There's some actual radar data out of Mexico, and this is useful because it is legitimate radar data. We can see that from 200 miles away. We can kind of look at the motion on that, and we can see a very persistent eye wall. Now, a lot of websites, commercial websites, they will put up fake radar. I see that all over the place on Google, so you do have to be careful. So anyway, we're looking at the storm from 200 miles away. This is probably going to be up at about 20 to 25,000 feet, but those high reflectivities showing up very well. And I think there might be a very slight east-northeast drift. The main communities along the Gulf of Mexico coast, those are probably going to escape most of the severe effects. This is a fairly compact storm. Merida also appears to be looking okay. The main problem there would be high winds and maybe some scattered power outages, but they are pretty far away from that eye wall. Here's a look at a very useful model. This is the HAFS, the Hurricane Analysis and Forecasting System. This is a rather robust mesoscale model designed for hurricanes, and did notice that it has performed fairly well with this storm. Let's take a look at the animation. We start out this morning at the analysis time 12Z, and take a look at the colors in here. Notice that we get into some maybe salmon and very light pink, or I should say very light purple colors, and the central pressure 939 millibars. So we run it forward and we see how it verifies. This is going to be about 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So it's fairly compact. Those strong speeds really building in an annular shape around the storm. Pressure fallen to 939 millibars, and now we're down to 931. So obviously we've exceeded that by quite a bit. But the trends are very useful, and this is certainly showing strengthening. This is going into 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Continued deepening, and then we look at the trends going into tonight. A little bit of weakening, probably from frictional interaction, the loss of latent heat because of the landmass just to the south, and the wind field weakening a bit. Starts increasing again, so some of that could be an eye wall replacement cycle. I would have to look at the other panels, but this is going to be about 11 p.m. tonight. And we see further deepening. Look at those dark colors really picking up. We haven't seen that earlier during the run, so this suggests maybe some rapid deepening overnight. And if we fit that to the current data, that would probably take it above 180 miles an hour. So we're just kind of speculating here based on this particular model. A little bit of filling right there, 917 millibars, 912, more deepening. So maybe some process has taken place in the eye right there. This is going to be tomorrow morning. Further deepening tomorrow morning, some very heavy dark colors. So this is definitely in the Cat5 range as far as this simulation. And it looks like it bottomed out around midday tomorrow. And now we're starting to see probably some interaction with the drier air aloft. No, it's hanging in there all the way through evening, tomorrow evening. Hanging in there, but the winds look a little bit weaker going into tomorrow evening and the overnight period. Then we're looking at Wednesday morning. Okay, it's still very deep, so this is suggesting Category 5. The wind field not quite as intense right there. Remaining quite strong during the morning hours. Now we're starting to see some filling of that low, and the wind field starts to, well, it's hanging in there during the late afternoon as it approaches Tampa. There's Tampa right there. So yeah, this is a monster, even during those last 12 hours approaching Tampa. This is almost a worst case scenario. And we do see that filling to 945 millibars right there, the wind field tapering off. But as far as storm surge, that does not really mean much. That weakening is associated with a strong storm surge. We saw that with Katrina. Same situation, Category 5 weakening to Category 3 as it came inland, and that produced a record surge at Pass Christian. They had 28 feet of storm surge, which set an all-time record in the U.S. So this goes right into Tampa Bay. The main thrust of the onshore winds directed at the coast right there around Sarasota and Bradenton. And then it moves inland during the early morning on Thursday, crosses land. So certainly some hurricane force winds inland, and then looks like it weakens up to 985 millibars right there going into Friday, and it's probably taken on a extra tropical structure at this point, I would guess. And we take a look at the track with the 18Z GFS data. This is the very latest. Let's see what it's doing. This model performed very well with Hurricane Helene. That's not to say we're going to get a perfect record this time around, but we take this forward into the Wednesday time period, and it's got it pretty much going into the same area, Tampa, Clearwater. So we are pretty much on track. NHC has placed the track in between last night's northerly GFS run, which went up towards, I think, Cedar Key, and between the European solution, which was further south around Sarasota. So we're kind of in between, kind of converging in this general area. Now, this is not a very useful model to determine the wind strength. However, we can run this back and just kind of take a look at the trend, because that can be useful information. And here you can see one factor, the 18Z initial panel has it at 982 millibars, so we're way off on that initialization. And even by evening, around the time you're watching this, only 977 millibars. So obviously, there's aspects of the storm that are not being captured by this global model. However, the track Well, to a large extent, that's determined by the steering flow, but early on, when the model has it at a very low strength, it's using the shallower layers, so there's a little bit of uncertainty in this final track, so it probably lean more towards what the halves is showing, that earlier model we looked at, but overall they're in good agreement. So we'll just kind of check back on this as it captures the evening data at 0Z and 06Z, and you can check out and see where the new path ends up. So there it is, the halves track, and one aspect, of course, is the storm surge, and that will be severe. The unique coastal bathymetry or underwater terrain near Tampa is a gentle slope, which worsens the storm surge. Also, the funnel shape of the bay, just starting out with the pressure, the 900 millibar pressure adds about 4 to 5 feet of storm surge due to hydrostatic effects. Then the wind-driven waves and swells add even more height. Current storm surge forecast is, I believe, 8 to 12 feet. Let me take a look. This stuff is changing so rapidly. Oh, so we got hurricane warnings now. These were just issued. The storm surge warning, looking at 11 to 15 feet. And if the storm holds together as it approaches the coast, we could see that running even higher. So if you're on the western Florida coast, you need to be taking this seriously and play it safe. Tampa is the most vulnerable place in the U.S. to storm surge, and worst case estimates for damage run up to $175 billion. And the behavior before landfall will be similar to Katrina, Cat 5 weakening to Category 3. And a lot of people will be fooled by what happened with Hurricane Charlie in 2004. Kind of a similar track. Weak surge, but Charlie was strengthening up to landfall. This one is weakening from a very high intensity. Now, the negative factor for storm surge is the rapid movement, which means less time to pile up all that water, so that will be a detrimental effect. So a lot of variables at play, and we've got another day to look at this before we get into the final 24 hours. Speaking of detrimental, here's the detrimental effects chart, kind of a nickname for this product. The blue here is the highly sheared areas that are not favorable to storm development. The red is the dry areas, and that focuses on the, 850 to 700 millibar layer. It doesn't look at the low-level field. So it's going to be missing a little bit of detail, but you can see the storm initially running right through here, running the gauntlet between the areas of shear in a very favorable area. Some of the dry air in the mid-levels begins wrapping into the storm, and some of it starts approaching in the lower levels. But again, that's not really detected by this product. Anyway, that could be a factor for Wednesday, but I would probably consider the halves model for the solution of what might happen. And it did verify very well with that Category 5 intensity. You see here yesterday, the intensity Category 5 only by the halves model. So evidently it does have some skill, at least with the intensity. Of course, we also have a few other storms out there. Leslie, which is not going to be a factor, and Kirk. Well, that one is interesting because it is taking a track towards Europe. Yeah, let's take a look at that right there. Heading for France at tropical storm strength. We can see those winds as it approaches Europe, about 40 to 50 miles an hour for sustained winds. This is a very stormy time on the Europe coast. The Great Storm of 1987 that hit the UK was on October 16th. They had 86 knot winds at London Gatwick Airport and 119 knots along the coast of Brittany. Okay, we should take a quick look at that surface map. We've got a little bit of weather in the U.S., a Canadian polar air mass moving into the Midwest and Great Lakes area, most of the cold air advection into the northeastern U.S., some very cool temperatures around Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Cleveland. Frontal system from off the Virginia coast into Georgia, and a backdoor front moving into Texas with those northeasterly winds pushing some drier air in, not just the temperatures, but the dew points. Look at those dew points, 40, 45, 44 in Arkansas, contrasting with 58 closer to the coast. Now, some of that dry air will be flowing out into the Gulf as the hurricane approaches. That's just off in the bottom right there. So, yeah, that will interact sooner or later with that hurricane circulation. Elsewhere around the U.S., we've got a thermal low in the southwestern deserts. We've got excessive heat warnings through Arizona into parts of Nevada and into California as well. Much of the coastal area around Los Angeles and San Diego under an excessive heat warning. Some of you have asked, how do we do those maps? And yeah, we use Digital Atmosphere. This is actually a program that I've written. You can get this at weathergraphics.com and download it to your PC. And that's how I go about drawing the fronts. So there's all kinds of tools for doing that. You can draw upper air fronts, stuff like that. I don't use that too much. And of course, you can do the old dry line. So there's all kinds of handy things that I use, and feel free to check that out. And of course, it has a component that not very many people know about. That's the GRIB import. And you can bring in the Canadian data, and it's all very easy. You just go down through the drop downs, set your times, and that is how we do the charts. The isobars on here, this is from the GFS. The thickness is actually from the Canadian global multi-scale model. So a little bit of US and Canadian data going into these maps every day. And speaking of Canada and Alaska, let's head up north very briefly. Yeah, there's a bear clinic zone right there along the British Columbia coast there. That's supporting an atmospheric river heading up towards Vancouver Island. So very rainy there. They've got rainfall warnings up to 3 inches expected due to the atmospheric river. IVT is about 500 in a southwest to northeast band. Further north into Alaska itself, gale warnings south of Kodiak Island, gale warnings as well in the northern Bering Sea. An atmospheric river expected to affect the southern coasts on Friday. That's going to affect Valdez and Yakutat and shift into southeastern Alaska for Saturday. We could see some major flooding in that part of the state. IVT's over 1,000, but that's still several days away. In Canada, some fog problems at Tuktoyaktuk up there in the northwest part of the Northwest Territories. We've got wind warnings on the Ontario Hudson Bay coast right in here, and rainfall warnings closer to the warm conveyor belt right in this area right there. That's around the Gaspé Peninsula, maybe a little bit further to the east, to Bay Comeau and the lake districts north of Roberval. 2 to 3 inches of rain possible there along that cold front. Okay, let's look at the surface forecast, put the fronts into motion. This is the only place that you get this on the internet. I mean, some places do have fronts, but this is a more detailed analysis, and this is done by myself, dropping these fronts on here, and those are going to be fairly accurate. We do have this one system off of the coast of Florida, but that is not the hurricane. You're going to see that cross the peninsula. But let's go ahead and take it into the overnight hours, going into tomorrow morning and during the afternoon. Frontal zone through the southern part of Florida. Some showers developing all through that area. We're going to see a couple of degrees knocked off the temperatures in the southwestern deserts, only up to 106 at Phoenix. All of the San Joaquin Valley looking at mid-90s, so that's certainly good. Some rain spreading into Seattle and Portland. Then we go into Wednesday. Okay, that's going to be the big hurricane day. All eyes will be on that hurricane during the morning, and we should certainly have some much more accurate track data by then. And for the time being, it looks like that's going to approach the Tampa area. And there it is coming inland during the evening. Further up to the northwest, another batch of cold air coming down through Oregon and Washington. We're looking for some showers up there in upstate New York with this cold advection trough. Still warm in the deserts, 106 at Phoenix, but the San Joaquin Valley cooling down into the upper 80s in some areas. We go into Thursday. The storm tracks out into the Atlantic. It will be a dry day across much of the lower 48. The southwestern deserts looking for 100s with Phoenix at 105. Then we go into Friday. Milton moves offshore, and thankfully they get some drier, cooler weather into Florida. Rains invade the Pacific Northwest, some of it reaching Seattle and Portland. Then we go into Saturday, some cold air outbreaks starting to make it south. into the northern plains. Continued rainy on the northwestern Pacific coast, about a 30% chance at Portland and Seattle. Heavy atmospheric river affecting Alaska at this time, could see those flood issues. Then going into Sunday, that atmospheric river works down the British Columbia coast into Vancouver, Victoria, and Seattle. So the rain chances picking up there. Rain also with this strong frontal system into the Allegheny region, the eastern Great Lakes, and warm conditions continuing in the deserts with 104 at Phoenix. So we've got a couple of large cold air masses moving into the eastern half of the country, some Pacific air masses also moving in, so this represents a change going into October. We've got this one strong front moving into the central U.S., and that is the end of the sequence. One final update of the satellite imagery. Looks like the eye was pretty clear earlier, right around this time, but it's filled just a little bit, maybe with some cirrus. Anyway, it will probably weaken a tiny bit over this evening and then regain strength. Already can see some spiral bands starting to pop up, some very cool convection out there in the northeastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. Unfortunately, probably a small tornado risk with those storms. And of course, a better indicator whether it's weakening or not is going to be from the Dvorak data. And it looks kind of indeterminate. In fact, it looks like a little bit of cooling, which would be associated with strengthening. So, yeah, certainly this is complex work, and it does involve the hurricane hunters to pick out exactly what's going on in the storm with instrumented data. And there will be updates through the evening from the NHC, so be sure to check on those. Anyway, you better get this rendered and uploaded. Hope you have a great evening, and if you're in Florida, please be safe and definitely heed those evacuation warnings, because this is a serious situation. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday evening. We will try to return tomorrow, possibly for a live stream. We're going to see how that works out. So make sure you subscribe so you can get the latest information on what's going on. Okay, take care, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.